Hi, this is State Delegate Mark Corman, and from Wisconsin Avenue in District 16 to Pratt Street in Baltimore to the Boardwalk on the Eastern Shore and everywhere in between, Conduit Street Podcast is the go-to source for news about Maryland politics and policy.
Hello and welcome to the Conduit Street Podcast. Kevin Kinnally here with Michael Sanderson. Michael, how are you today?
Doing fine. How are you, Kevin?
I'm very well. And Natasha Mehu. Natasha, how are you?
Hey, doing great.
Excellent. So first of all, I want to let everybody know right off the bat, this is going to be a 100% Kerwin-free episode. Sorry for all of you who are just in love with this whole issue and school funding, but we talk about it enough. You're not going to hear that name again today. Is that fair?
Drop the hammer. That's it.
That's it.
I like it. Okay, you set the rules. Honestly, Kevin, it feels like the last couple of weeks, you and I have sort of had our nose stuck in the budget books, and we're flipping through all these provisions in the budget reconciliation bill.
Right.
Last week, we spent the whole podcast talking about bonds and all this technical mumbo jumbo, lots of numbers, lots of figures and percents and stuff. And so, honestly, I'm told there's other things happening around town. So maybe we turn the page a little, right?
Yeah, so that's exactly why we have Natasha here with us. And Natasha, what have you been hearing around town? I know that the General Assembly has been very busy, but let's get off of the name that we're not going to mention again and the wonky stuff. What are you hearing around town?
So how about those veto overrides?
Yeah.
That's definitely been top news the last few days.
For the members especially, right? It's not necessarily like if you're just visiting Annapolis, that may not necessarily be exciting for you. Mm-hmm. But for the members, they know a lot of people are, I've been assigned, I've got to carry some water on this bill and that bill, so I'm going to be speaking on the floor. I can't take a meeting this morning, I got to work over my notes, that sort of thing. There's not really a lot of drama here, though, right?
Yeah, I think it's all pretty much, put to bed in terms of they're going to override all the vetoes that they want to override. And we're talking about, there's a long gun bill, there's an oyster bill, there's bills dealing with two-man crew on trains, ban the box, et cetera, right? So all of this stuff, they pretty much have the votes the Democrats do, I think, to get all these overrides done.
Yeah, usually you can look at last year's vote and see how many people were in favor of the bill. And if that number is at least 60%, then you assume those votes will hold and they can override a governor's veto. I guess there were a couple bills where there weren't quite that number of yes votes, but sometimes you hold a vote and there might be a handful of people who are out sick or a subcommittee's been called off the floor, so you may not have the full quorum of the body. You still get a constitutional majority, but you may not have your supermajority number.
Right.
But nobody's been running around town saying, hey, we're flipping votes and we're going to hold up one of the governor's vetoes. Mm-hmm. So I haven't heard that from anybody.
No, I haven't heard that. It does make for good listening. You get to sit, everyone does their little speeches.
Right.
You relive what happened last session.
It's become an annual. Honestly, since we've had an executive administration in a different party from the legislative leadership, this has basically become an early session, just sort of an annual rite of passage. There'll be a handful of bills every year the governor dislikes, legislature likes, and we talk about them again in January.
And typically, this is the first order of business, but we do know there were appointments going on and some vacancies in the General Assembly, so they did push it back a bit, I think, waiting to get everybody sat so that they knew they had the votes for potential overrides, but that was delayed by a little bit. So a little bit later than normal, but certainly, it's become a tradition every year.
Yeah, hasn't affected business, big picture.
Not at all. Not at all. And Natasha, you're in the 7th District, so I hear there's something going on in the 7th District very soon.
Oh, yeah. We've got a special election coming.
Yeah, congressional election for Congressman Cummings' seat. First of all, it's a little bit weird. We know that folks in Iowa and New Hampshire are used to having these weird primaries while there's still snow on the ground.
Right.
That doesn't feel like what Maryland does. We tend to be a Super Tuesday or even later kind of state. So it just feels weird to have that in the air. And I guess, living in the district, you're seeing this all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
Are they knocking on your door? Are you getting a bunch of campaign material?
Get all the materials. It makes you feel special.
Right. So it is weird to see that happening now. We're not used to that.
Well, I do think it's a little interesting how you have the special election, and then only a few months later, you have the primary again in April.
Right. I mean, it's a weird construct.
Yeah.
And we know, I mean, these are unfortunate circumstances that made the necessity for this special election. But it is really strange. I've never heard of a primary and a general for the same seat being held on the same day. And in late April, that's what we'll have.
Right.
So whoever the major party primary winners in early February will be on the ballot for the general election in late April. And then if you're a party member, you'll also be voting in a primary for the November 20 general for basically the next term.
Right.
I mean, that's just really bizarre. What if, I mean,
I know, it's votes on votes on votes.
but I mean, I guess you think it's unlikely that, I don't know, you could have different people win. I mean, cut to the chase, right? Like, in theory, if it's a close race in this primary in February, I mean, this one thing that makes this peculiar is it's a seat that leans heavily Democratic.
Right.
So it would be a real surprise to see this be really contested in the general election, but it could be an open contest in the primary for the fall of 20 election.
Sure, absolutely.
So, and if it's a 1% race or whatnot, or if not quite the same number of people, I don't.
I know.
And it seems hard to handicap this one too. There are a lot of people running, and
It's like over 30.
and also
Seems
big
that way.
names and names that you haven't really heard in the past, but seem to be getting some traction. So I agree with you. This could be, close not only in the primary, but then down the road, you could also have some really close races for this seat.
I wonder if that sparks discussion about like we've talked previously about ranked choice voting and things like that. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if you've seen that bill introduced this session. We've seen some things clear in the way for it, but
Right.
in any event, who knows? It's a quirky election thing that Maryland gets to partake in.
Well, and we have seen some issues with General Assembly seats recently as well. Now there's a bipartisan bill here in Annapolis to do special elections for the General Assembly members as well. So not just members of Congress, but we're seeing a very interesting bill that, again, is bipartisan, and this would create special elections for General Assembly members.
Right, because right now the way it works is when there's a vacancy, the central committees put forward some names to the governor, and then the governor decides from there.
Right.
Right. And so that sort of begs the question, what the heck is a central committee and who are these people?
And not many people know.
Right.
to be honest with
For
you.
most citizens, you learn who they are because they're about to elect somebody.
They're in
And
the
sometimes
paper.
it's like for 3.5 of the 4-year term.
Right, right.
So that's a quirky thing in our current law. So I guess the notion is, and Kevin, you follow election legislation, that the idea is if a vacancy happens in the first half or so of the 4-year term,
Right.
then let's hold a special election in the intermediate 2-year term.
That's
right?
exactly the notion, right? So they don't want central committees who, again, no one really knows or understands, but these are small groups for each party. And if there is a vacancy, they get to vote and put names forward to the governor, like you said, Natasha. And that essentially, so if you had a vacancy in the first year, the central committee could determine who the replacement is going to be for 3 more years. And I think a lot of attention is being paid to this. Again, we have this bill now that seems to be moving. I think this bill is going to move. Like you said, Michael, if you're in the first 2 years, instead of having a central committee, a select small group of people vote to see who's going to replace the candidate, it's going to be a special election.
Yeah. And not to slight central committee members. I mean, the process for putting them in office, they're elected through the party
absolutely.
primary. So it's not necessarily a secretive thing, but that's just a peculiar thing. No one has the bandwidth to study all the down ballot races, and all sorts of people, even faithful party members, will frequently just sort of say, I don't know, there's 18 people on the list. I'm supposed to vote for 7. I've heard of some of these people. Some of them are, that's my school board member, or that's my, that's my state delegate, but I don't know who the rest of these people are.
Yeah, central committees certainly play an important role, but I think we've seen a number of seats become vacant, and I think being in the news so much, people have started to say, wait a minute,
Right.
Why is this happening this way? We've seen instances where, some of the meetings maybe haven't been public, and that, there was a highly publicized incident, and that just begs for legislation here in Annapolis.
So you're calling it? You think the bill passes?
I think the bill passes.
I think it's probably the smart money too. Yeah.
I thought was really interesting yesterday, as we sit here on Thursday, January 30th, there was a parliamentary inquiry, And Michael is our parliamentarian here at MACO. If you ever have questions on parliamentary procedure, Michael is your guy. So this all had to do, Michael, with a proposed amendment. And the amendment essentially would have struck the bill. What is the deal here? Why does this happen? Why was there a parliamentary inquiry?
It's just a little twist. Basically, there's an awful lot of power vested in the chair of a legislative body. And so sometimes you'll hear things like the Speaker of the House might say, the gentleman is not recognized. Someone is trying to make a disruptive motion or to complain about something or is speaking when they don't really have the floor.
Right.
The chair gets an awful lot of deference to make a judgment. But what lies behind that is the body can always overrule the decision of the chair. So that's just a majority vote. And if a majority votes in the negative that the decision of the chair should stand, then the body gets to decide. So This was a circumstance where someone introduces an amendment on a bill, which basically struck the entire bill. So the chair rules this is out of order. That's not amending a bill. That's completely perverting the floor debate. And that's not appropriate for now. But they called the question and said, okay, let's have the chair stand down and the body will judge whether the chair acted correctly. I can't recall seeing that in the Maryland General Assembly. It's in Robert's rules. It's in the minutia of parliamentary procedure. It's not something you see frequently. But
you mean everyone doesn't have their Robert's rules with them?
Right. And they all did have their rule books out on the
suddenly
floor.
everybody's looking at Rule 84 for 15C and stuff. So quirky stuff.
All right, we're going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we'll get into some more on tobacco, vapes. We'll talk about new procedures, including video on the House floor, all that and more after the break.
The Local Government Insurance Trust is the primary source for Maryland local governments to get insurance coverage. When the private insurance market doesn't understand your needs and doesn't really want to be in the business of covering your law enforcement officers and other public employees, Legit will be there. That is exactly why Legit was created over 30 years ago. Legit is different. Legit is owned and managed by its local government members. That means that when we do well, you do well. Members get premium credits when the trust has a good year, and Legit offers training and best practices year-round to make sure our members are doing their best with risk management. Competitive prices, outstanding service, and coverage that fits your needs as a local government. You can't beat Legit for all your coverage needs. Find out more at lgit.org or drop by their exhibit space at the MML or MACO conference.
Welcome back to the Conduit Street Podcast. Kevin Kinnally back here with Michael Sanderson and Natasha Mehu. Natasha, what else are you seeing around town? What else is happening out there?
Well, there's lots going on in the public health side, particularly when it comes to tobacco and related products. So, we're talking e-cigs and vapes, lots to do with taxing.
And we've talked about e-cigs, vapes before on here, and you took everybody through, the issue and why this is an issue nationally, statewide, and locally. But now we're getting to the point where we're talking about taxes as well. Yeah,
and it's really an important public health angle because the higher the taxes on the products, the more they cost, the less likely people are to smoke, and the less likely youth who tend to have less money than established people are to pick it up because they can't afford to do so.
So there are a couple bills, right? What are these bills proposing in terms of who can tax? Is it state or state and local? What are we looking at?
So there's a big state and local tax bill. It would raise the state tax up $2. That still doesn't put Maryland in the top tier of taxing states.
This has been sin tax city. Over the last 10, 15 years, a lot of jurisdictions have decided this is a place to emphasize both for the benefits of reducing usage, but also gain revenue for one thing or another, including tobacco cessation.
Right, exactly.
Part of the mix, right.
And it raises significant money. I mean, the tax bill that's in the state and local tax bill is estimated to raise $340 million.
It's not a small chunk of change.
That is not a small chunk of change.
So you mentioned state and local.
Yes,
so there's
and
a
local.
Local component, and I know there was a big fight about this some years ago. Michael, you were around for that. I mean, what is your read here on whether or not counties will be able to tax tobacco.
Well, you can almost, you don't need to sit in the room for the bill hearing to imagine what the players would say about a green light for local governments to do an add-on. We'll do 50 cents, we'll do an extra $1, and we'll target it for this, or we'll target it for that, and so forth. But if the state gave a green light and just said, go nuts. I mean, obviously you'll have the vested interests who will show up and say, listen, our business is selling this stuff, or we're in the distribution business, or we run service stations and we actually don't make any money on gas. We make money on selling people, ho-hos and cigarettes, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's the nature of that debate. And if there's no cap, right? Couldn't some jurisdiction who said we just want to be a smoke-free county say the tax is going to be $40 a pack, right? I mean, it's not a novelty. Like the power to tax is the power to destroy. So in theory, you could see someone extending this to a logical conclusion, saying that's too much to give the locals.
So what's your read here?
I mean, I don't know. Local governments are in a tough spot that we're asked to do a ton of things. It's possible there's more asked of us around the corner, whose name I won't say. Mm-hmm. So we're okay, so looking at revenue sources is a reasonable thing for local governments to do, but that seems like a pretty big lift. I wouldn't start spending any of that money locally, gang.
Okay. I think we get
fair. It's fair. We support it.
We do support it. We
did support the bill.
So how about with vapes, though, Natasha? There's also a bill to allow taxation on vaping products. Do you think that's any different here than just your run-of-the-mill tobacco? Is there a different mindset?
Same arguments there when it comes to revenue sources, but also public health policy. Yeah. And I mean, there's still a lot going on with vapes, and particularly when it comes to youth. So in addition to the taxation bills, we're also seeing a bill in to prohibit flavored products.
Right, which has already happened at the federal level.
Well, the gears are turning, right?
Yeah,
right. It's coming. I think early February they can't sell flavors anymore, from what I understand. So this is a belt and suspenders type of deal. Maryland wants to do this as well.
Maryland wants to make sure.
Okay, makes sense.
Plus, the federal government is doing this through rulemaking as opposed to through federal legislation, which means it could be at the vagary of each Congress or each administration.
Any day, it could be overturned.
So it's not inconceivable that Maryland would want to say, we want to make sure this doesn't happen in this state. I'd be surprised if we're the only state that does that. So you said belt and suspenders. I think that's probably right.
And so that one is probably likely to pass, the flavor ban.
What about, does that bill also get into sort of the general regulations on where and when and how you can't smoke cigarettes apply to vapes, or do we already do that?
Well, we had already in the Tobacco 21 bill that would have applied that to
last year's bill.
I think it generally applies that you can't smoke here, you also can't vape. But we all know vaping is much easier to do in places where you're not supposed to do it because there's not really an odor, so it's a lot harder to detect. So I can certainly see in the near future trying to crack down on that a little bit more. We've heard about that in schools. It's a big problem in other places, so it certainly makes sense that they would try to beef that up.
Yeah. There's a lot of movement there to regulate where you can vape.
And then who knows what happens with this as a public health concern. I mean, we know there are some cases, and maybe it's a dispute on the number of cases of people getting seriously ill and dying from respiratory diseases connected to using vapes and e-cigarettes, and whether that's the ingredients or whether it's the manufacturer. No one seems to have that totally pinned down, but that may play out. I mean, this is going to be step by step. It's another, evolution in technology, and policy's got to catch up. Running theme here on Conduit Street.
Natasha, tell us about what's going on the House floor in terms of how we listen and now watch.
Yeah, there's now video streaming of the House floor,
which is really weird, right? It's weird.
That's my number one takeaway.
It's like watching TV now.
Okay, so
very professional.
Okay, so I'm part of the way with you that it is cool, and it's definitely more personal, and so although I will say, like, I'm a longtime Annapolis guy, and I don't know, Is it just that I'm old and I fear change?
No, let me tell you this. Like it takes a long time to memorize everybody's voice. The Senate is pretty simple. But when you're talking about the House, it takes a long time to memorize all those voices. And so now I'm stuck to
that's a skill, right? We would sometimes get together and have an important bill to local governments, and we'd have 8-10 people around the room, huddle around a set of speakers or about somebody's laptop, and then it would be like, "Who's that? Oh, that's the delegate from Frederick. Okay, who's that? No, she's a Democrat. That's why she's going to say this and that." And like that was kind of an important insider Annapolis skill. And now, it's just right there. There's a little bar underneath the person.
Quality is very good.
Oh, it's so good.
They got everybody's names up right away. Yeah, they're doing a really good job.
You can see the board.
So probably good for the citizens on balance. I will continue to hold out some skepticism that who knows what this does. Once you make the deliberations more open and accessible, that is, of course, a good thing. But then do you end up with like the deliberations that are public become theater? And because everybody knows that sometimes happens. There's this well orchestrated meeting that happens for the public, but I don't know what happened. Was there really a handshake? Okay, you're going to talk about this, then we're going to accept that amendment. Who knows?
Right.
And I'm not pointing fingers at our legislators, but they're human beings, and everybody wants to have their day. And especially if your name is going to be written up there on TV and you can use that in your campaign advertisement. You look very official and you look important, and there's a lot of gravitas with these people, and they're standing. There's marble in the background and pillars and a lot of I'm a little afraid of the shininess of this going the wrong way.
And on the other side of that, I mean, these folks are on the floor sometimes for a long time, and sometimes they're on their computer, they're doing things. It looks like they're not paying attention. So if you were just watching someone give a speech and in the background it looks like someone's not paying attention, you'd have to think that they're going to have to be cognizant of that as well, right? That everybody's going to want to look like I'm paying attention. I don't want to be the person in the background doing whatever. And people think I don't know what's
just
going on.
Just going to start to dread the person sitting in front of you, standing up to talk, and you're like, again?
Really? Do we have to do this? Right?
So that'll be interesting. And I am interested in seeing if we do see more folks standing up. It'll be interesting to kind of track that if this does have an effect.
So we'll be on the lookout for some General Assembly kayfabe, which I think could be a thing. Yeah.
Very interesting. And then we heard President Ferguson yesterday say that today kicks off the first real day of session in 2020. And what does that mean, Natasha and Michael? What is he talking about? We all know we've been here for a few weeks, but what does he mean when he says that?
I take that in a larger context, that I think we as insiders know the 90-day session has different phases. And there's an opening phase, which is sort of like the prelims at a big sporting event, right? Sure. So legislators show up in town and you spend a couple of days. You might have a new office. You got to get moved into the office and get pictures on the wall and that sort of thing.
Have some new staff.
Yeah, people have been reassigned to new committees. And so you have a meeting to just go over, let's meet the staff, here's how things going to work at your new committee,
et cetera, et cetera.
Right, yeah. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff. And then there's a couple weeks of sort of light duty on the floor of the House. You welcome some guests, you give a couple quick perfunctory speeches, and they're done in 20 minutes. Through the first half of January, first 2 weeks of session, they're done in the House floor, 10, 15 minutes, thereabouts. And then they go to committee, they have short work in committee. But what's happening is legislators are working on their bill drafts, they're meeting with stakeholders, they're doing work in advance of what are eventually going to become bill hearings and big policy debates. That is not obvious to people who visit Annapolis. So if you bring the 5th grade class to come down and learn about how government works, you put them up in the House gallery and they come up and they read the minutes, they get a prayer, they introduce 19 bills, and then they bang the gavel and go home.
Like,
the kids are like, what is going on? There's nothing to see here.
That's a pretty good job.
So I think there's a little bit of sense of, okay, like let's not have a January vacation. In my opinion, that slights a little bit the substance of what's going on. And like we're right in the middle of that. There are I've lost track of how many legislators have run up the flagpole. I've got this draft bill. Would Mako take a look at it? Because I don't want to mess up what you're doing in my county, but I still think I have an idea for a statewide bill. And I mean, that's not in the handful. That's in the dozens of things like that are getting shaken around. Here's my first draft, but I'm open to changes. Getting that kind of stuff done before you have the public hearing and you bring everybody in, I think there's value in that. If we said, well, we can do things quicker, I think this week we bumped up the filing deadlines by a week. Is that right?
Yeah. It's Monday in the Senate and Friday in the House.
Right. So that puts a lot of pressure on everybody.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
that crunches that early phase a bit, but I don't think it would be wise to think we can just do without the first 3 or 4 weeks of session, and we could do this whole thing in 60 days. Just show up on Groundhog Day. I think you would need a lead up period, even if you weren't gavelled in as a legislature. You'd still have to have all the time for that preliminary stuff. Otherwise, it'd be chaos and too many public hearings.
As you said, it goes in phases. So while this was the slower, quieter lead up phase, when we hit February, that's when you hit the February crush. Those bills come in, the hearings come fast and furious. You're there all day waiting on dozens of bills in a committee. I mean, even earlier this week, I was in a committee until 7:30, and that's before the crush.
It doesn't feel slow to me and you and Michael. Like, it doesn't, because as you said, we're dealing with these bills every day. We're trying to get amendments. We're talking to stakeholders. We are still in committee testifying. I know that the General Assembly is working. I mean, it's obvious, and we definitely know that the bill drafters are working overtime, right? I mean,
poor bill drafters.
Oh my gosh.
It's always the best conversations in January are just, so bill drafting is backed up. There's like a couple hundred bills still coming and drafting, and everyone's just sitting there like, what are these bills?
Right.
What's coming down the pipe?
I need to know now.
I put in my bill on New Year's Eve, and I still haven't seen it. It was 3 sentences long. How come
We
sorry,
got a lot of bills. And you're also hearing briefings now, right? You're hearing, that'll pick up also in February. They'll have to deal with the budget coming up. So there's a lot to do that gets crunched into February. But I agree with you right now. I think it's a little unfair for anyone to say that there's nothing going on. Just because they're not having long committee hearings doesn't mean that they're not running around getting co-sponsors, talking to their stakeholders, to their constituents, and working with people like us to try and craft legislation that works for everybody.
And so when the Senate president sits before the Budget and Tax Committee and he sees the schedule of bills they're hearing that day, and it's a whole bunch of big consequential revenue issues. And I think he's waving the flag saying, as far as the public's concerned, like, this is the first meeting of yours where the room is full, there's people out in the hallway, everyone's waiting for their bill to be called. There's lines and lines, and it's going to be hours upon hours. So I think what he's kind of doing is saying, okay, we did our warm-up laps, now we got this is in the pole position, the green light is off, and now everybody's off to the races. So committee hearings are underway in earnest, big stuff, big consequences. We're really rolling now.
So we have that to look forward to. But on a lighter note, what is going on with this hot sauce stuff?
It's Maryland. Maryland, this is what we do. Right?
Old Bay, it's all over Twitter. People are freaking out. I mean, what is going on?
Because it's already gone. I mean, you have Old Bay hot sauce, and as soon as I find out about it, it's already sold out. I'm devastated.
Our friends at McCormick, who we love dearly, and they contribute mightily to the Maryland economy and our way of life. And Old Bay is a centerpiece of what it means to be a Marylander. Okay, so all that for the record.
Put that on the table.
But what are we doing?
Right.
I mean, are they trying to create like the next sort of chicken sandwich craze where there's only so many bottles? And now, I mean, our staff was looking yesterday. It's for sale on eBay. If you got a couple $100, you can get 6 bottles of those.
Come on.
What are we doing?
I mean, I know our friends with Baltimore Sun. They apparently got some.
They got it right. They've run a piece.
They like it.
They're doing the clickbaity. Here's what happened. We got the hot sauce. Here's what happened. Right. And hats off to them. That's what I would do too. But I guess Conduit Street is not quite yet like the big media player where we can have back channels to get our own hot sauce.
Right. They don't drop it off.
But we'll do that soon. We'll have the official Conduit Street review coming soon.
McCormick, if you're listening,
we're doing that.
We're looking for some hot sauce, McCormick. If you're out there listening, we'd love to try it. We love Old Bay. I mean, come on. I got people texting me, friends from out of state.
Yeah, what is this?
What is this thing? And I'm like, I don't know, because I can't find it. I'm not paying $60 on eBay to get it. But we love Old Bay, so we're looking forward to that hot sauce for sure. All right, any closing thoughts, Michael and Natasha, before we wrap up today in our education-free episode? Just to reiterate that.
I think the Senate president is right that we're shifting gears. And yeah, we had our first night where everybody was looking around saying, "Where's Natasha?" "Oh, she's still in committee." Yes. And everybody said, "Oh, yeah, that's right. That is right. That's what happens. Right. Just suddenly there's people missing. There's little dotted outlines where our staff colleagues usually are. It's like, no, they're tied up. Yeah, that one's going to go forever. And you had the misfortune of the bill you were testifying on. The sponsor's birthday is that day.
Yeah.
So our friend Delegate Moon. Speaking of the hot sauce, right? So we'll name drop Delegate Moon, and you're trying to work with him on some legislation, and we'll get him in for the hot sauce too, maybe. You know,
Absolutely.
We can convert him, because I just want to say he's taking a bold position on his views on Old Bay. So yeah.
Natasha, any closing thoughts?
I'm just ready and looking forward to it all. I got my snacks in my bag, got my power boost charger.
You live a glamorous life.
You know,
you really do.
When you have to be there for 7 or 8 hours, you've got to be prepared.
Yes, you do. All right, so we'll leave it there. If you enjoy the podcast, please go ahead and subscribe. Follow us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, and of course, the Conduit Street blog. But until next week, Kevin signing off for Michael and Natasha, and we will talk to you soon.